Hi, I'm Julie with Paisleys and Polka Dots, and I'm back to show you the second part of our painting techniques. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to paint some of the details, shading and highlighting techniques that I use on some of the pieces, like these little pieces here, how I have the highlighting and shading on this little detail piece. If you need the base coating techniques, that's on a separate video. So this is part 2 of that video. And I've painted, base coated a few shapes here, and we're just going to dive right into what we're doing. So everything's already base coated, and then I'm going to show you how to shade or highlight. So I have a clean bucket of water over here. My bucket has 2 different compartments to hold my water, so that I'll always have a clean water and a dirty water, and I went over that in the first video with you. So as far as brushes go, again, these are my angle brushes, and this is what I'm going to highlight or shade with, and I'm going to show you how to work those. And then the little highlight swoosh marks that I make on some of my pieces, I use the smaller round brushes. Okay, so let's just jump right in and do this. Now you're going to need a palette pad. This has a coating over the top of it, so it has a slick surface. And you can buy these at your local hobby and craft store. I haven't tried wax paper, but it kind of feels like it's got a waxy surface, so it might work. I'm not real sure. I just typically use my palette pad that I have here. You're also going to want to have some paper towels so you can dab off your excess water. You will be using your paint brushes a little wet, so you're not going to fully dry your brushes out like you would with base coating, but you're going to still need paper towels to dab off your paint or your water. The first one I am going to do, so let's say if you've done one of our Santas, sometimes on his feet or on his little hands, let me stick some of these aside here. You're going to want to put out a little puddle of white paint. Actually, to start off, I think I'm going to back up here a little bit, and I'm going to show you on my palette pad or on my paper how I do this first before I actually go onto my piece and do it, because you're not going to be able to see me blend out with white paint. So let's put some green out here. And I typically use different size brushes for my highlights, depending on what size my piece is or how big I want the shade or highlight to be. So I'm going to wet this brush here, and you're just going to, I wet my entire brush and dried it off first, just so I could get all the bristles wet. And then from there, you're just going to want to dip the edge, the end. Let me see if you can make sure this is in the video. Dip your bristles in the brush, or in the paint bucket, sorry, and dab it front and back on your paper towel. So my bristles are pretty moist at this point. Okay, and then you're going to dab in just the corner of your brush, like so. So it's got paint on both sides. Okay, and then you're going to, on your palette pad, you're going to want to blend this back and forth. So I'm going to slightly move as I blend back and forth. I'm going to slightly move to my right. Okay, so I blend back and forth like so, and see how it's blending out. So I have my dark over here and my light over here. So once I have it blended, then I can go onto my piece of wood and I can just pull that stroke. Now it doesn't work real well on paper, of course, because it's just soaking up all of the liquid. And then when I want, so every single time you are going to make a stroke or a highlight or a shade, you're going to want to dip back in that paint every single time and reload your brush. So I have about that much on my paintbrush, just in the corner. Blend it back and forth a few times. You don't want to blend too much, because then you've taken all the paint out of your brush. And then again, if you're going at an angle, just pull it at an angle like that. And sometimes on your wood, it used to be said don't go back over the top, because it's gonna, if it's really wet, it pulls up some of that. And yes, it does happen on occasion. Just let it dry or wipe it off and start over again. But that's kind of like trial and error. You kind of have to find the happy medium of how many times you can overlap it or go over it. But I just kind of brush it on. So I'm actually going to try it with some white paint here onto Santa's little feet. Okay, so I'm going to dip my brush into the water, just the bristles, dip it in the water, dab, dab, and then put my paint onto my brush, just like so. Move this out of the way. And I'm going to work it out on my palette pad just a couple of times back and forth. Okay, and then I'm going to hold this in my hand. And I always pull toward me. I have more control when I pull my brush strokes toward me. So I'm going to start over here at the corner, and I'm just going to brush this on. Now see how I've got this little part right here that didn't really cover? So that's where I kind of like, and I mix some little strokes, but then you don't want to leave it like that because then it's not a nice, beautiful highlight. So go back over the top and lightly, you're going to need a light hand with this. Lightly brush that on, just like that. Again, you're going to want, I actually clean my brush every single time I reapply paint. And that's what makes it look so nice from one stroke to the next, is I wash my brush off, re-wet it, reload it, and do it again. So if I have like a heavier brush like this one, let me wet it first, get all my bristles wet, dry it off, because I'm sticking my whole brush in the water. That's why I'm getting it completely wet and then drying it off, because I want my brush to be moist when I first start all my bristles. But then I'm going to dip this into the paint, just my bristles, like so. My brush is wet, dab it off, dab, dab, and then dip it into my paint again. So this one is going to allow you to grab more paint onto the corner of your brush. Okay, and you don't want to go over the spots that you've already done on your palette pad. You want to move over into a new area of your palette pad. Brush back and forth so it blends out. Now when I go and do my wood again, this is going to be a much larger or wider stroke. See, so I am going over it, it's not pulling up. And see how much wider that one is than the first one. So it's just a matter of preference on how you like it. Of course, I got paint all over my fingers from when I was base coating these. So, so I'm going to switch back to my smaller brush. Make sure you wash your brushes out. You don't want to leave paint in your brushes to dry. Wash them out. That way they'll stay nice. So I'm rinsing this one out. I'm going to make sure this is in the video here. Dab, dab. Get me a little bit of paint right here. See it on the corners like that. Blend back and forth on my palette a couple times, maybe 3 or 4 times. And then again, I'm going to turn Santa's head because I want to put the highlight down here at the bottom. So I'm going to go from the side and just brush it on. Okay, and then I can put another little highlight right here on his thumb and just brush it on like that. Okay, always towards you. Pull towards you when you paint. Okay, so we'll let that dry. Here's another one. This is the top of the sun. So again, I'm actually washing my paint off in my dirty side of the bucket. Then I'm going to dab it off, and then, well, actually, when I did that, I just, you can dab it off here too. Make sure you water, dab, dab, dip it into the white paint, blend it out, and this is on our sun. Okay, so start on the side. So highlights are always, typically I use like white paint or anything of a lighter color. If the white is too stark for you, then choose a color that's, say it's green. You can choose a lighter color green if the white is too stark for you. Or to make this, if you want it lighter, you can always mix a little bit of white and the green together, and then that will give you a lighter color than this green, and then you can highlight with that. I'll show you how that works. Let me mix a little bit of paint up here. We'll do that, and then we'll put some white out here, and I'll use the edge of my brush. One of my brushes has like a little palette. They have what they call palette knives, and this is actually a little mixing tool. And I just mix my paint together like this. So it's not white. It's just a really light color of green. Kind of make yourself a little puddle like that. Wipe my brush off. Okay, now I can go in, wet my bristles. I'm going to wet my bristles. Dab, dab, and I'm going to put it into the light color of paint, like so. And then I can blend it off again on my palette. And I can put a highlight on my palm tree here in that color. Now, when you highlight or shade, think of nature and how the sun will shine on a piece or a flower or a tree. So your highlights are always going to be the lighter part of what you want to paint, and that's going to come like if the sun was shining down onto this piece, it's always going to be on the top side. Your shade is always going to be underneath, like a petal or the leaf of a palm tree. So, and once you start on one, you're going to want to continue with that same part all the way around your piece. So I'm going to start with this one, and I'm going to shade this top little leaf right here. So I'm just brushing it on a little bit. Okay, so then I want to do the top of this leaf. And sometimes you can, if you have enough paint on there, you can okay, again, so now I'm out of paint. So dab, dab, dip into my little green paint over here, blend it back and forth, and then I'm going to continue. And as you can see, this piece is etched, so I already have lines here to follow. So this is where this little highlight is. It's got a little etched line here. So I'm going to start there, and I am just going to kind of go around here and pull. Just like that. And here's another etched line right here. So I'm going to start right in there. I can pull that in, kind of work in some color. Okay, so on this one, I'm not going to want to do this side because that's the bottom of the leaf. I'm going to want to stick to the top side. I'm going to add more paint, dab it off. So you want to reload every single time. Okay, so I'm going to pull from the outside and then go in this time. Because I can't go this way unless I'm going to flip my brush around, which I can't do it that way. It's trial and error in how you and then if you want to blend out that harsh little corner right here, you can just wet the end of your brush a little bit and kind of blend that out a little bit if you've got a harsh edge. So, and there's the leaf. Okay, now you can go back in and you can do your inner leaves. Like, see how I really didn't highlight the tops and bottoms of these. I just highlighted the inner leaves. So it just depends on how much highlighting and shading you want to do. Typically, I don't like to add a whole lot just because I try to keep my pieces easy for everyone, because shading and highlighting it's optional. You can just paint them and sand them and splatter them and they look just as cute. So as you can tell, I did these inner leaves, and so they're all on the top side of that etched line. So I'm going to go in and do that now. Dab my brush off, dip in. Now I did this one with just white. I'm doing my green paint with this one. Okay, so blend it out. Again, I'm always working these little lines toward me. Okay, and this one should go a little bit further. And I'm using a very, very light hand. I'm barely, it's not heavy at all. Okay, again, I'm going to want to stay on the same side all the way, well, on this one, up top, up top. Up, this one I goofed. Should have been on this side. But we're just going to leave it, because by the time you get done, I always say there's no right or wrong. It's just your artistic preference. So again, on top of the leaf. Okay? Pull towards you. And as you get to the end of your pull, kind of lift up on your brush, like pull upward, and that will give you that edge to lessen the harshness of that edge. And like I said, if you you can take your little brush or a Q-tip. Q-tips work nicely just to lessen that harsh edge if you get a harsh edge at your very end of your stroke. Okay, so now I can go in and I can do, when you shade, so shading is always going to be the opposite of where you highlight. So you want a darker color and pick a color that will complement it. So this is just a darker green. This is light Hauser green, and this is medium Hauser green. So again, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to dip into the paint, load up your brush, blend it back and forth a couple of times, and then I'm going to take it and I'm going to pull, once again, I'm going to pull toward me. And because it's darker, then it's going to give me a shade line. And sometimes just because I don't have a lot, I don't get enough paint on my brush, or I blend out too much, I have to reload my brush every single time. With some colors you have to do that. This one I can go start on the inside, go along that edge, and just brush in the color. Okay, let's see. So we're going to go, let's keep going around the edges first. Now you want to make sure that when you do your shading that your highlighting is already dry, because then you're going to pull up that paint. Okay, so I'm just blending out my paint on my pad. You can see where it goes from dark to light. Just add in some color on the edges. And you can go over it again if you find that you want it darker, like this one here, this edge here. And if you want your strokes to be heavier, you can dip more paint in your brush, or add more paint to your brush, so that it's giving you a heavier shade line like that. And then that is going to make it go further into your, that, or switch up brushes and get a wider brush. So see how much heavier that line is than these lighter lines. So you can even add more over the top if you want it darker or lighter. So now I'm going to go in and I'm going to shade on the opposite side of those inner leaf strokes. So these here. Let me dry this real quick. Okay, so I'm going to go on the sides of the highlight with the dark. And you just want to keep reloading your brush. Dip it in and then blend it out onto your palette. And I'm pulling toward me and I'm lifting up as I get to the end. Let's see if I can get another one in here. And when your brush starts to split like this, then it leaves a line. So either I kind of try to push them together as I'm pulling, or wash your brush out. I think that's because I don't have enough water in my brush, so my bristles are separating. That's another reason you want to invest in decent brushes, because the bristles don't separate as easily. Okay, I have a few more, so I've done all three of these. Now I'm going to want to do this one. Okay, and one more. I'm going to load my brush one more time. And then I'm going to do this one. So just stay consistent with your sides. Always on top and then always on the bottom. All right. So let's see. On this little one, like we can even do like the highlight. So that's the way you shade. I can even add shading on, say, like the bottom. This isn't probably the right color. Let me see if I have a darker yellow that I can use. Let's try an orange for the sun, because you can even, if you want the just to blend, sometimes not even a shade mark, but just having different colors in one piece. So I think I'll use my larger brush for this one to add some orange to the tip of my rays. So again, I am putting my bristles all my bristles in the paint. I'm going to dab it off, okay, and I'm going to load my brush like so, blend it out onto my palette. Okay, see how much bigger that shade is? Blend it back and forth. And then you can take this and just kind of brush it on. Like that. Okay, and that's going to give you, and then I can even put a shading at the bottom here. Brush it across. So you can kind of blend it up if you want, like that. So now my sun has a nice little shade on it. So this one I just kept it all white, just white highlights. This one I added a little bit of orange to give it some depth and dimension to it. So you can experiment with highlighting and shading techniques and see what works best for you, see how you like it. I'm going to go back to my little brush and this little one here. So anything where you see these lines on here, these two coconuts are on top of this coconut. So you would have a shade where those two coconuts are overlaying that one or over the top of it. So I would put my shade mark right here. Like I said, we think about the way the sun would shine on it, so the two top coconuts are going to put a shadow on the bottom coconut. So let's get a darker color because we're going to shade that first. Okay, and I kind of hold it in my hands. Wet my bristles, dab off my paint. Sometimes your paper towels are going to get really wet and you just replace them with new paper towels. Okay, blend this out a little bit, and then you're going to put this little shade mark right here. Okay, and you can even do it, see this one's on top of this one, so we can also put a little shade mark right there. So I'm just kind of putting a little shade mark right there. So now they look like they are sitting all at different levels. Can you see that? Let's see. Okay, now let's put a little, still have some white paint. I'm just going to use the white paint. Dab off on my paper towel, dip into the paint, blend it out, and now I'm going to paint my little highlights on here. So pull toward me, oop, and go around and put a little highlight on the edge here, and then a little highlight on this edge over here. All right, just like that. Super cute, right? And shading does take, I always used to practice on like scratch paper or just scrap pieces of wood that I just paint strokes on, you know, paint base coat a solid piece of wood and just paint strokes on it and practice, especially with the swooshes that I'm going to show you how to make. If you want to put little highlights, like I showed in the last video with a little dot highlight, again, I usually use a fresh puddle of paint to dip into, but I can put a little highlight dot on here. So I'm going to dip onto here, and I probably don't want that big of a dot. So I'm going to dot it off one time, and then I'm going to put a little highlight on there. And I can go down each one, keep dotting it so that they are all different sizes. And that'll give me a little highlight on that. All right, and then so now I'm going to show you how, that's how you do the highlighting and shading. And didn't that really bring to life this palm tree? And like I said, this one's shaded along the edges, this one's not. So basically what I did, after you shade, you can even go back in and take your sandpaper to distress it a little bit. I'm just sanding the edges, not the whole piece, because if you sand the whole piece, you're going to be taking off this paint that you put on. So I'm just rubbing onto on the edges itself. So there you go. Okay, and even Santa's hand, I can shade this, you know, I can sand the edge of this, and it will pull up some of that highlight, but it still stays on, like so. Okay, now to make, let me get some of this sand, some of the dust off here. Okay, to make your swoosh, I use different size brushes depending upon how big I want my little swoosh to be. Okay, so again, let me try this. fresh paint again. You don't want your paint to be drying at all. So I guess I could have used the orange here. So depending upon, you're always going to want to use your bristles wet. You want to have it moist. Okay, and sometimes even if you're doing a really light swoosh, you can even water down your paint just ever so slightly. So you can go in and say like the orange here. You can water this down just a little bit, not too much, just a little bit. Okay, and then I cleaned it off before I dip back into it because I've got too much paint on the brush. Okay, so dip it in, kind of load it up pretty good, just your end. Okay, now you're gonna, I'm gonna do it on the paper here. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna smash it, and then as you pull, you're gonna lift as you pull it. So you're gonna smash it, and then pull, and lift up. And every time you're gonna wanna reload it, smash, and pull. And the faster you do it, it doesn't, it's probably smoother. So you want to do it pretty quickly. So smash and pull. So depending upon the pressure you make is depending on how big or how, you know, when you lift at the end. Hopefully you can see doing this. So, and these are something that you need to practice. And you do want to make like a kind of like an angle. I mean, I guess you could do, some of them you can do straight. So you're just going to smash and pull. And these are something that I use to practice because it's not quite as easy as the shading. The shading's a little bit more forgiving, but this, so if you want to make a bigger swoosh, I'm going to wet my bristles again, dry it off. Make sure you got a nice pointed brush, dip it in. And it doesn't always have to be wet. Try different consistencies and see what works best for you. But this one's going to make a bigger swoosh. So if I do that and I pull up, see how my end is a little bit drier? So that's why dipping into paint that's a little bit moist or a little bit slightly wet works better. So I'm going to pull, and as I pull, I'm going to raise my edge. And this is something that you need to lay down and leave it. You don't go over the top of it. Here's a really light one. I'm going to make a really tiny little swoosh. Okay, so pull, and then typically I like little tiny swishes, just little highlights like that. And that's all there is to it. So if I want to make a little highlight here on Santa's hand, I'm going to get some white paint here. And I'm going to water this down just a little tiny bit. Just put a little bit of paint on it. Okay, wash my brush out and then reload it. So this is basically what my paintbrush looks like. All right, and then I'm going to, and again, I pull toward me because I have more control that way. To try and push it away, you don't have as much control. You can try it that way. Maybe you do have control that way, but I was taught to always paint toward me. And another thing is that if you have a shaky hand, so that's all I did. I pulled it toward me, and it's easier to brace your hand on something instead of trying to paint it up in the air like this. Have the palm of your hand resting on something so that when you go to pull, you have that support of your hand on a hard surface, and you'll find that it will work better. So again, let's dip into the white paint, load up the brush, the tiny brush, and I'm going to put a highlight all the way across the top of this. So again, I'm resting my hand. If you're on a surface, like I have everything so close to me right here to try and get everything into the video, but I have my hand resting, so I'm going to put it down, and then I'm going to pull just like that. And as I pull, I start to lift up. All right, now let's do Santa's swishes on his feet here. I'll do a little bit of a bigger, I'll use this brush. It's a tiny bit bigger than that. Okay, work with a clean. Okay, I'm going to load up the brush, and as you can see, I'm not loading all the way to the very end of the bristles. I'm just loading the tip of the brush, but it's got like a little puddle of paint on it. All right, and I'm resting my hand and I'm going to pull all the way across. So smash and pull up. Now to do the other side, I'm going to switch. I'm going to reload my brush. You don't want to use the same paint that you already had from your other swish. You need to reload every single time. And then smash and then pull up. Okay. Now if you do, like you get it on there and you're like, oh, I don't like it. Well, then take your paper towel or a piece of something you have on hand, get some clean water, and you can wipe this off if you do it pretty quickly. This one's already started to dry. I should have done the other side because I had just painted it. But you can wipe it off and then try again. Let me load up my brush again. Okay, try to start where you were the last time. Okay, smash and pull. And that's all there is to it. Sometimes people will add the little dots behind it. So if you want to do that, they're pretty tiny. So I'm going to dot one off on there, and then they kind of go like this. I don't typically do that, but I just like the swoosh because less is more for me. But it's always a matter of preference, however you like it. And that's basically it. I showed you how to splatter in the last one, but I can go over that real quick. So once you have it all done like that, and if you want to sand, you can sand it. That's all preference. So in order to splatter, I wet my toothbrush, dip it in my white paint, really load up the toothbrush with paint, kind of dab it off, and again I use a scrap piece of paper to make sure that my splatter is going to be the consistency that I want. So I'm going to try it on here first, just rubbing my fingers across the bristles about 4 to 6 inches above my piece, my work surface. Okay, and then I'm just going to lightly splatter these pieces. And doing this, it kind of gets rid of some of the inconsistencies, I think. It kind of just pulls everything together. All right, and then that's all there is to it. So try out these techniques, practice on a piece of paper, see what works best for you. It's all kind of trial and error, but I hope these little tips helped you out. And if you have any questions, please comment below and I will answer them, or you can email me at info@paisleysandpolkadots.com and I'm happy to answer. So thank you for watching. Hope it helps. Bye-bye.